Bulletproof Radio, a state of high performance.
You're listening to Bulletproof Radio with Dave Asprey. Today's cool fact of the day is about the timeless value of cacao. It turns out that classic era Maya money in the late 600s and 700s actually did grow on trees, at least where conditions allowed. Cacao trees grew in Tabasco, Mexico, and a few other places with humid river valleys, heavy rainfall, and protection from sun and wind. And the Mayan rulers at Calakmul in Mexico and Tikal in Guatemala collected annual tributes in cacao beans, not coffee beans, even though those also grow in the same regions. Today's guest is someone I literally look up to because he's taller than me, and for many other reasons, none other than Tony Robbins. #1 New York Times bestselling author, entrepreneur, philanthropist. For more than 4 decades, millions of people have enjoyed his warmth, humor, and just transformational power in Tony's business events, his personal development retreats, which I've had the honor of attending multiple times. He's the nation's #1 life and business strategist who consults and coaches some of the world's top athletes, entertainers, Fortune 500 CEOs, even presidents of nations. And interestingly, and you might not know this about Tony, he's the founder or partner in more than 30 companies, 12 of which he actively manages in a bunch of different industries, including virtual reality, Major League Soccer, top resorts and spas, companies with combined annual sales of $5 billion. And today, Tony's coming on the show so we can talk about his most recent book called Unshakeable, Your Financial Freedom Playbook, where he talks about how he went from these incredibly scrappy stories as a young man building his business to this very unusual position of being able to manage a dozen companies at that level of performance. It's just about unheard of, even in the world of successful business. So we get to pick his brain. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Dave. It's a privilege to be back with you.
What made you, at this point in your life where you've changed the lives of millions of people, some of my favorite entrepreneurs cite your work as being what lit their fire. So you've already had this personal transformation level to become an expert on the financial side of things. What was your motivation for doing that?
Well, there's only a few subjects that really impact the quality of your life in a significant way, right? It's your emotions, it's your relationships, it's certainly your finances and your career. And so I've always actually taught these principles, fundamental principles, and I've coached Paul Tudor Jones now for, 24 years, I believe it is now. And he's one of the top 10 financial traders literally in the history of the world. And so I've learned a lot in that area, and I've not a lot thought about in this area. But when 2008 happened, I did extremely well because, you make more money when things are burning down than when they're growing if you understand what you're doing. But I was just devastated to see the number of people around me that were hurting. I saw people that have been incredibly successful financially just take gigantic hits during that time in their businesses and in their investments. And it made me nuts. And I remember I kept thinking somebody's going to do something. And 2 years later, around 2010, I saw this documentary. And it was really a systematic breakdown. It won the Academy Award, but a systematic breakdown of how a small number of people almost took down the world economy. And then the punishment we gave them was to give them more money. So by the end of this film, I mean, you're either totally depressed or you're totally pissed off, depending upon your personality. I was the pissed off type because depression doesn't change much. And so I thought, what can I do? I'm just one guy. Well, I could interview 50 of the smartest people in the world because I've got access. I mean, literally the smartest people in the history of finance: Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, Carl Icahn, right? Paul Tudor Jones. And so I thought, if I do that, I can then figure out what's really working in the system. I can get an unassailable view of what it takes to succeed. And so I ended up doing this 575-page monster called Money Master the Game. I'm really proud of it. Steve Forbes said there was a Pulitzer Prize for an investment book. This one, hands down, we got huge endorsements, great impact, #1 bestseller. And I fed a lot of people because I donated all the money to Feeding America. So we fed 400 million people in the last 4 years, to give you an idea. And we're going to feed 1 billion over the next 6. But I wrote Unshakeable because in the midst of all this, I realized, my God, we have the longest bull market in history now. We were approaching it at the time. There's going to be a correction. There's going to be a bear. And if we're not smart, people are going to go right back to what they did in 2008. And they're going to get hurt again. And I don't want to see that happen. I wanted to write a book that somebody could read in a weekend, literally. A millennial who thinks they have too much debt and just they don't think there's a future, and I want to show them exactly how they can succeed. And somebody on the other end, you take a baby boomer that thinks it's too late and show them they can still become financially free. And so that's why I wrote the book, and I'm really proud of it because it's not me. It is the works of the greatest investors in the history of the world. And the only part that's me is the psychology side, which very few people would argue that isn't my expertise for the last 41 years. So it's a beautiful combination. And I found just tremendous stories of people changing their lives as a result of this. And this book also, I donated 100% of the profits. So we're going to feed another 100 million people over the course of this. So anybody who picks up the book for themselves will also feed 50 families, which I'm really excited about.
Now, you have the book broken out into 3 sections, and you talk about wealth. There's a playbook. But the area that's most interesting to me is the psychology of wealth. And Tony, the reason that's interesting is that when I was 26, I made $6 million, which was awesome at the company that held Google's first servers. When I was 28, I lost it because I did not understand the psychology of wealth.
Yeah.
What do people do wrong when they think about wealth or when they have emotions around wealth? Like, what's getting in our way?
Well, we all have a 2 million-year-old brain, right? So, and that brain is not designed to make you happy. It's designed to make you survive. And it deals with money issues like survival. There's no saber-toothed tiger that you got to go run from now. So now the brain worries about life and death. Oh my God, do I have enough money? What are people thinking of me? And it has these insane reactions. And so, there's a whole chapter in the book that's all about the biases that we have that show you that your own brain is probably the biggest challenge in becoming wealthy, because you have all these conditions in your own psychology. There's, confirmation bias. When we believe in something, we don't look to disprove it. We live to prove it to ourselves. Well, in investing, that's disastrous. You talk to Ray Dalio, he'll tell you his number one thing is to find educated people who disagree with him violently. And he wants to interact with them because he wants to see what they're seeing that he's not seeing, because he knows he can't see it all. It's our nature as human beings to think in terms of recency. This is going well now, so it's always going to go well. Or it's going terribly now, it's always going to go terrible. There are seasons, there are economic seasons, and they come around every 20 years. And there's cycles that are shorter than that as well. But if you understand that winter always comes, some winters are long, some are short, but they come. In other words, one of the facts that most people don't understand around investing, it keeps them from investing, is, oh my God, I don't know when's the right time to do it. The market has been up for a long time, or the market's due for a correction. Well, 5% of the time the market, in every year, on average, 5% of the time the market hits a new record. So when you hear a new record, it's about once a month. So you get an idea. That's true over history on an average. Now, sometimes you have long periods without it and longer periods with it. And what people don't realize is there's also a correction. A correction is a technical correction from the high of 10% drop or more up to 20. Once you hit 20, it becomes a bear market. And so these corrections happen every year since 1900 on average, every single year. And here's what's crazy. The average correction is you lose 14% in the short term. So if you react, you're going to lose your money. But if you stay in, like, I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, you probably remember in January of 2016, we had the worst stock market opening in January in the history of the stock market. $2 trillion melted down. They went to Davos, where all the wealthiest people in the world, and said, what do we do? The market's down 9% in January alone. And, they asked, Ray Dalio, the greatest hedge fund investor in the history of the world, what should we do? And he said, don't panic. There's one of these every year, and we're not 80% of those, by the way, don't become bear markets. 80% don't. So he said, don't need to panic. And he actually said on CNBC in the middle of this panic, read Tony Robbins' book. He said, I did an interview with him and I showed you exactly what to do in this situation. So if people understand that our minds are not going to help us, we have to direct our minds. And the best way to do it is to understand that there are cause-effect relationships that create regular patterns. And just like there's seasons, and we know the order of the seasons, we know some are long, some are short, but you never skip winter, right? And you know that winter isn't forever. It's followed by springtime. So look back at 2008, 2009, the market drops 50%. People are in total disarray, freaking out. But if you didn't freak out, what happened in the next 12 months has happened in every single bear market in the history of the United States for centuries. And that is, it becomes a bull market. So we went up 69% in the next 12 months right after that. If you didn't panic, like if you put your money in the market on the worst day, like an hour before the crash, you're up 300% right now. So it's like, It's just ridiculous that people don't understand. So I wrote this book to be a financial playbook for anybody to say, here's how I go from where I am to where I want to be. And here's how to get my mind so that it's helping me instead of hurting me. And here are the strategies of the best investors in the world.
You talk about having buckets. What are the different buckets that people ought to be thinking about with their money?
Well, there's two financial decisions. One's a financial decision, one's an investment decision that are the most important. And the first one is the most basic, and we all know it, but not everybody does it. And that is you've got to decide to become an owner of businesses, not just a consumer. You don't want to just own an Apple phone. You want to own not just Apple, but you want to own the companies that are the strongest in the world and that have the opportunity to grow at the highest. So first, you got to decide I'm going to be an investor. And the only way to do that is say there's a percentage of what I earn that I'm going to set aside to invest no matter what. I'm going to take it off the top. I'm never going to think about it again. I give the example of Theodore Johnson, who was a UPS driver in the 50s, and he never made more than $14,000. But a friend of him pulled him aside and said, I'm going to make you a wealthy man. He said, we're going to take 20% of what you earn and make it a tax, a wealth tax. He goes, I can't give up 20% of what I earn. I can't live on the 14 grand I got right now. He goes, listen to me. If the government came in and said, there is a 20% tax, you'd say, I can't pay it, and you'd pay it. He said, you'd adjust. He said, once you adjust, your life will change. Well, this guy, he never made more than 14 grand a year, retired with $70 million. True story.
Wow.
And he gave away 35 million while he was alive because he became an owner, not just a consumer. So that's the first decision. Now I want to answer your second decision is the one you're asking about. The most important investment decision is your asset allocation. It's a technical term in investing, but all it really means is you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Any idiot knows you got to diversify. Well, where do you diversify? Well, the first thing you got to do is realize some investments are more secure, but less risky investments that are more secure tend to give you a lesser return. They still give you a return, and if you're willing to do things through time, that lower return is safer and will give you a great return. Then there are things that have more risk to them. I think we call them the risk growth bucket. Those are things like real estate or stocks that can go up unlimited number amounts. I mean, if you invested back in 1974 in Walmart, when everybody, the Wall Street Journal, everybody's saying this guy's out of resources, and they were wrong, and you put in $1,000, it's worth 25 million today.
Wow.
You never did a single thing. So there's unlimited upside on that potentially, but there's also unlimited downside. The company could go bankrupt. The real estate could be worth a lot, it could be worth a little. So you have to decide, how much money do I put at low risk environments, kind of the security bucket, where it'll grow slower but more likely? How much do I put in the higher risk areas where I might have higher growth, but I also could lose it all? And that has to do with many factors, but a couple of them are, number one, how soon do you need money? If you're young and you're in your 20s, you can make a lot of mistakes and still make up with it because there's so much time. If you are, somebody that's, getting your 5 years from retirement, then you can't afford to take the same kinds of risks. That's number one. Number two, you got to know what your risk tolerance is. And everybody thinks they have great risk tolerance, but as you know, people go to my seminars and we often play games. I have a game where I'll just suddenly say to everybody, stand up. And I'll say, make change with other people. And I reach into my pocket as this, I'm making change so they know what I mean by it. And then for 5 minutes while a song's playing, maybe 3 minutes, they exchange money. And people reach in their pocket, and some people take out $1, and some take out 10, and some take out 100. And this exchange happens. And at the end, I just move on to the next subject, and invariably somebody's pissed off, and they raise their hand, and they go, I want my money back. And I said, what are you talking about? That guy's got my $100 bill. I took out a $100 bill. He took out $1. He gave me $1 for a $100 bill. I want my money back. And I said, well, first of all, who said it was your money? Second of all, who said the game's over? And third of all, why the hell did you give him $100 for $1? And if you're stressed over $100, you're never going to make it in investments because you're going to lose more than $100 at times. All investors lose money. So how much, what's your real risk tolerance? Because you don't want your investments to make you have more stress. You want the investing so you have less stress. And then finally, the third one is, what's your access to cash flow? So, you and I are at a stage of our lives we've done very well. We got a lot of access to cash flow. We can afford to take more risks. It doesn't make or break us. But if you're an earlier stage or a later stage, you don't have the cash flow, then you're going to have to make the decisions differently. So are you going to do, 70% security, 30% growth? Are you going to do 30% security, 70% risk growth? These are factors that are more art than science. And I encourage people to get with a registered investment advisor, a fiduciary. It's a big word, but, most people don't realize that of the 310,000 financial professionals, of which there's 200 names for, wealth manager, individual wealth manager, advisor, they got all these terms. 90% of them are brokers. And there's nothing wrong with a broker. The only problem is they're just a salesman. So they don't necessarily have the skill. They are taught what to sell. They're incentivized to sell the things that the company makes the most money on. And these companies are not bad. They're designed to bring the most value to the shareholder, not to the investor. And so they're going to take care of the shareholder first. And so the way they do that is with massive fees. So really what we're really talking about here is understanding how does the system work so you can take advantage of it instead of it taking advantage of you.
All right. So that's covered in the book, but there's another bucket that I hear from a lot of my millennial friends. They're saying, look, I can put money in the stock market and I might make money over time. I might lose it. But once I have an experience, no one can take that away. So I'm going to invest in the experience economy. I'm going to go on vacation. I'm going to spend on even education. How do you balance that? Having the experiences that make a life worth living, even going to Tony Robbins, unleash the power within. Do I invest in that or do I invest in the stock market? How do you advise people to balance that out?
Well, I look at it, people ask me all the time in interviews like this, what's the greatest and what's the worst investment you've made? And it's easy to describe the worst investment, but the best investment has always been me. I asked that question to Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett says, what best investment I've ever made is you. And I said, what do you mean me? He goes, what you do. And I said, what's that? He said, I went to Dale Carnegie. He said, without my ability to influence and communicate, he goes, all my other ideas would be worthless. So I always, and Jim Rohn, my original teacher, used to always say the greatest investment is the one in yourself. And I believed it and I've done it myself. Yeah. But I also think at the same time that, you need a security bucket, a certain percentage you're going to put that's less risk, it'll grow over time. You need a growth bucket and you need a dream bucket. And I look at the investment side and say, look, if you're going to set aside, you're going to say, I'm going to save 10%, 15%, 20% of what I earn. I'm going to put it in a bucket and then decide where to invest it. That first stage is the most important stage, is committing to making sure that those numbers are there. But then I look at it and say, what's my dream bucket? What's the stuff that's going to give me juice? Like, I know some billionaires that literally they cross-examine their wives still over and their kids over what they spend. I mean, they could spend, $1 million a day and never run out of money, in several lifetimes, but they're still in that tight place. They're still in the place where they haven't really figured out how to enjoy their life thoroughly. I believe that you create a dream bucket. In my dream bucket, I put little things and big things. Little things like tickets to be in the front row at the seventh game of the NBA championships. There was a goal years and years and years ago. Now it's a regular experience for me, right? Or I was going to charter a plane to go on a vacation. Now I have my own plane. So you start with some of the small ones, or a certain amount of money that I could just give away. I want to give away $5,000 a week to people on the street. I want to give waiters and people $200 tips. I just want to fun and light people up. So I came up with all these little fun things. And then what I did is whenever I had a success in my growth bucket, my risk bucket, where you have the bigger returns, I put a third of it in my security bucket, so it keeps growing faster. I put a third back in, so I'm using the house money on my growth risk bucket, and I put a third in my dream bucket. Or when I had some really big hits, I take a big hit and say, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to buy the plane. And, I sold one of my companies for $200 million and said, I got everything I want. Well, maybe instead of chartering, it's time to own a plane, and it changed the quality of my life in some way. So that was kind of dream bucket. But what goes in your dream bucket, things that are not investments, like even my resort in Fiji, which now is a great investment, but in the beginning it wasn't. It's like when people buy, antique cars and call it an investment. You're full of shit. As soon as we have a downturn in the market, that $150,000 car will sell for 35 or 40 to somebody else, right? That's just how it works. But so you don't put investments in there. You put the things that are going to give you life experiences that you love, and they can be little things that cost $100, $1,000. They can be bigger things. But I really believe in having those be funded by victories as opposed to funding that first. And when it comes to my own self-education, I don't look at that as my investment money. I just look at that as a must. I've read 700 books in the area of human development, psychology, physiology. I didn't read a book a day, but I was reading about one every 4 days because I took a speed reading class and went in. And then I started listening to audios like crazy. And it's just a never-ending process of education. To me, that gives me the edge. And I'm always looking for the edge. And, the people I bump into, same as you, Dave, is always people that are usually the best in the world at what they do because they're always looking for that edge. That's what makes them the best. They're always hungry. Or there's somebody who's hungry because they set a new goal, or they've had a big challenge, or going through a divorce, or they started a new business, or their kids have gone to college and want to decide what to do now. And now they look at their life in a new way and they want new answers. That's when people tend to come to me, and I think then they come to you as well.
It's inspiring to hear that you're doing that. because when I was younger and I did not have financial wisdom, I didn't do any of that stuff. And it was only when I had some really serious health problems that I said, I'm putting 20% into my own biology.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Into personal development. And, having made the $6 million, I looked at a friend and I said, I'll be happy when I have $10 million. And it was such an asshole thing to say, but this is a friend at the same company. Everyone was driving BMW. We'd all made at least $1 million. But it was one of those things where I still hadn't gone on vacation in a long time. I wasn't taking the basic self-care things because you get caught up in that. What's the Tony Robbins hack for not getting caught up in that greed mindset?
Oh, I don't know. I think everybody's different. I've never really been driven by the economics. I know that sounds crazy because I've done well financially, but it's never been my gig. My gig, I love, having quality things, and I admire and respect people of quality craftsmanship and things of that nature, but it's always been about people for me. It's always been my mission. And I think people that get into business just to make money, you can make money, but rarely do you if you're just doing it to make money. I know it's not for you, Dave. I mean, you've lived this life of trying to find answers for yourself, and you spread them to other people. I've lived this life looking at answers myself and spread them to other people. And I think in the beginning, you don't make money in business anyway, right? All the money goes back into it. So unless it's a passion project, unless it's truly a mission, it's hard to do extremely well. So my hack for that is to get around, is give money away. I did a whole chapter, as you know, in the book on Unshakeable to show people the science of this, that what actually gives you joy. When people say, money doesn't give you joy, they don't know where to shop. Because as you said earlier, if you buy things, they have a very limited time period of enjoyment. It's different everything, but usually 6 months, a year into something that was new and gorgeous, you don't have the same feelings for. But the thing that lasts more for enjoyment is experiences, as you already noted. Experiences live with us. They can live with us for decades, and they really, especially if it's a transformative experience. But the most valuable thing, it's even more than experiences, is giving. Because they've shown today they use technology where they can read the biochemical changes in you minute to minute by monitoring your saliva and what's happening in your biochemistry. And, there are transformations that happen when you give when you're not giving to get. I'm not talking about a trade. When people give and then they don't get and they're mad, that was just a trade. There's nothing wrong with trading, but it's not going to make you happy. But when you give, like they did studies where somebody buys coffee they spend $20 and buy coffee for the next 3 people in line at Starbucks, which I hope $20 covers. I don't know if it really does anymore. But the point is, the joy they get of buying this for these total strangers, just $20, will usually last multiple days. Whereas the thing you buy, you might get a hit when you get back in the car or something again for a few days, but it doesn't have the same lasting capacity for that. And it can be with small amounts of money, much less big amounts of money. I mean, in my own life today, the goals that excite me, are not like, I'm fortunate if I got a plane, I'm gonna get another plane and that stuff. That part doesn't do it for me. What does it mean? I want to feed 1 billion people, 1 billion meals. And now I'm doing an X Prize to have 1 billion people around the world fed sustainably. I'm providing 250,000 people a day with fresh water in India. I'm going to get it to 1 million. And, it's saving lives every day. These kids die of waterborne disease. It's so easy to solve. I've freed 1,500 girls. I'm going to free 10,000. But in the last 3 years alone, 1,500 from slavery. There are more kids in slavery today and more adults in slavery today than any time in history. Smaller percentage, but a larger number of people. And when I've been able to, and I've gone undercover and done that, and seeing that I can use my resources to take these children that were tied to a bed, forced to do unmentionable things, and now they're free. I mean, I have a plane, so I'm conscious. Okay, I'm flying a plane. I got a carbon footprint, so I did my homework. Say, how much is that? How many trees do I need to plant to balance it so that I can do what I did in the last, it's been 6.5 weeks. I went to 15 cities in 8 countries, from North America, South America, like Vancouver down to Brazil, back to Vegas, to Scotland one day, Italy the next day, Russia for 26,000 people the next day, Serbia for my AI the next day, 20-hour flight down to Australia for another big event. I couldn't do that without a private plane in that time period. So it's like 3,000 trees is all it takes. So I planted 5 million. I'm planting 100 million trees. I'm more excited about these things than any toy you could give me. And I know that when people taste this, when they have an experience of this, I know it sounds bullshit, it'll change you. But the reason I'm able to do it is because I gave a dime out of $1 when I had no money. If you don't give a dime out of $1, you're not going to give 10 million out of 100 million or 100 million out of 1 billion. Not in a trillion years, you're not going to do it. So people hear this stuff and they go, oh yeah, that's great for you, doing well. I'm doing well because I did this. I did this when I had no money. I took all the money I had and gave it to somebody. And it was one of those days where I just was inspired. I was touched by it. It was actually an interesting experience. I was struggling in my business. You know business well enough to know most guys and ladies overestimate what they'll do in the first year, and they underestimate what they can do in a decade or two, like you and I have done. But it's like, I remember I was so frustrated, and I'm like, nothing's working. And it was midnight. I was driving down the 57 freeway in LA in the middle of the night, this area near Pomona, not a nice area. And I was like, what's wrong? And I pulled over to the side of the road, and I kept these physical journals. I still have the journal. And I wrote on one page, "The secret to living is giving." And I just started crying. And I realized when I started, it was all about giving, but then I got frustrated. I got caught up in the business stuff, and I wasn't really tied to that. And then, so that started me on a change. And then I was still struggling though. And I remember about, I don't know, maybe 3 months later, I was in Venice where I lived. I lived in this 400 square foot bachelor apartment. And, I was sitting there feeling sorry for myself and reading, watching TV, and then looking at my bills and going, holy shit, I have no money to pay my rent. And I had, I don't know, like 21 bucks, I think it was. And so I left my car because I wasn't going to pay for parking. And I drove 3 miles to this place that was on the water where they had all you could eat salad bar. And it was El Chorito, if you're familiar with it. It was like tacos and all that shit. I figured I'm going to load up for the winter here, right? And so I go in this place and I'm loading up, eating tacos, burritos, salad. I'm just loading up. I think it was like $5.95. I figure I could probably make it here like 3 more times, as long as I don't spend any money on gas. And this beautiful woman walked in the room. I couldn't help know. She was just gorgeous. But then I was waiting to see the guy she was with. And I looked, and the head of the guy was down at her waist. It was clearly her son. And he was, I don't know, probably 9 years old, something like that, probably in the 4th, 5th grade. And he wore this 3-piece suit and tie, and he held the door open for his mom. And then he went over, I'll never forget, he pulled the chair out for her, and he stared into her eyes, and he was giving her so much presence. And something about it just deeply moved me. And so I got up, I paid the bill, and so if I had 21 bucks or whatever, I had 16, 15, $14 left, whatever it was. And I walked up to this little boy, and I didn't look at his mom, and I just said, hey, I just want to meet you. My name's Tony, and my name's Charlie, he says. And I said, Charlie, I said, tell me something. I said, I just want you to know, I see you're a class act. Who taught you to do that? I mean, I saw you hold the door for your lady and hold out the chair for her, and, taking her out for lunch like this. And he goes, well, she's my mom. I said, that's even more impressive. He goes, no, but I don't have a job yet. And he said, I can't take her to lunch. And I didn't have a plan to do this. I just instantly said, yes, you can. And I reached in my pocket. I took all the money out in the world, 15, 16, 17 bucks, whatever it was, slammed it down on the table, change and all. And he looked at me, his eyes are like giant, like garbage can covers. I'll never forget. And he smiled at me, he goes, what is this? I said, that's for you. He goes, I can't take this. And I said, yes, you can. And he said, how come? I said, because I'm bigger than you are. Right? And he just giggled like crazy. And then I wasn't doing it for the woman. I just shook his hand and I walked out. But I didn't walk out. I like skipped home. I mean, I'm going to probably look like a total dork because, my car wasn't there. But I was like, I had no fear. I had no worry. It was the first time in my life where I was beyond scarcity. And I remember I went home, had no plan to figure out what to do the next day to eat. I went to sleep happy as a clam, just like I was euphoric. And I couldn't figure out why. And I woke up the next morning and it hit me. I don't have any money. I don't have any food. But, look, I got food in me. I could fast for a few days. And I can go back to the restaurant. I got my whole plan going. And then the snail mail came, the old-fashioned mail, because there wasn't the internet in those days. And a guy that I've been chasing for 6 months, that when he had no money, I loaned him $1,000. And it was a huge amount of money for me then. He didn't answer my phone calls. And I opened this letter, and it's from him apologizing and giving me $1,200 interest as well. And in those days, that would have kept me going for 3 weeks, right? Or a month. So, and I'm reading this letter and got this check, and then I just started to cry. But it was not sad tears. It was beautiful tears. And it was a day that I will never forget as long as I live, because I thought to myself, what does this mean? And I don't know if it's true, but I decided what this means is I was rewarded because I didn't do things for stars on my chart. I didn't do it for acknowledgement. I didn't do it because I had the money. I did it because I knew it was right. And I did it with no fear. And I can honestly tell you, I've had, I actually have 54 companies now. We do $6 billion in business. But along the way, it wasn't all an easy task. And I can remember being near bankruptcy multiple times, but I never went to that place of fear again since that day. Not because I didn't have challenges. It's just like, once you give it all, when you have nothing and you realize there's more than enough, it changes you permanently. And so I say to anybody who's listening, one of the most powerful changes you can make is to give now, not to wait. Do you get some gift that's so effing big? Like I remember I came up with this idea. I was supposed to speak at this high school in Houston, or this grade school in Houston. And they've been using my material for a year at every grade, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all up to sixth grade. And the sixth graders only been able to do it for a year. The other kids were going to get it for multiple years. And I just on the spot said, you know what? I want you all to go to college if you want to. So I will pay for your college education for every one of you. And there were 75 kids there. And I said, as long as you keep a B average, and I'll help you get a mentor to do that. And as long as you give me 25 hours of community service, because I didn't go to college, but I wanted them to have the compelling future going to college. And I knew that if I could get them to stop being people trying to get from other people, but someone who's there to give, that would change them even more. I lost half of them the first year because their parents objected, single moms, to the kids having to do any community service. You can believe that. The balance, I kept 98% of them. I only lost two all the way through college. And some of them are now, doctors and lawyers, and a couple of other of them have their own businesses. And it's just beautiful to see. But again, when I did it, and I committed, I wrote a contract and everything else, I didn't have the money. So I was like, this is a pretty big commitment. But then because I committed to it, the money showed up. And I found that to be true. That's how you create a life as opposed to manage a life per se. And that's what I believe most entrepreneurs do anyway.
That is, it's profound. And at the beginning of that, you mentioned that if you're in business with the goal of making money, that you're probably not going to do a very good job of it. And I might add, you probably won't like your life while you're doing it either.
I totally agree. Totally agree.
Man, I wish someone had told me that when I was 20. That would have been helpful. But I finally got it. I was maybe a little slow to understand that. But I didn't start Bulletproof as anything other than a blog to share the stuff that I wish someone had told me. No idea it would turn into the company it has today. But
passion project. It's beautiful.
Yeah, happy to make it happen.
Cool. Congrats, brother.
And Tony, throughout your life, you've, at least all the stories you tell, you have like a sparkle in your eye. You have this just ebullient energy of joy. And you talk about times when you've turned it on at various points. And I know because I've seen you backstage, I mean, you are very conscious about managing your energy, more so than probably 99.999% of humans. And you just talked about that crazy travel schedule. It helps to have a private jet, of course.
Of course.
But even then, that beats the crap out of you biologically. What do you do to maintain that level of energy, be on stage jumping for 14 hours a day and hop on a plane and do it again the next day? Like, give me some of your biohacks here. Everyone wants to know.
I have so many, as you know. You and I share so many as well of devices that we use. But, I have a group that I work with. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of Olympic athletes and, some of the greatest on earth. And as a result, I've gotten it hooked up with the best trainers and with the best people to measure. And there's a group of doctors that's based out of Tampa that work with a lot of these top Olympic athletes. And I had them come and measure me about a year ago. And it was they had this device they put on your chest that's the most advanced of its type in the world. It's like $65,000 and it measures everything, heart rate, availability, acceleration at a level that's so precise. And it's giant. So I had this on my chest for the 4 days. And on the first day, I looked at them after, about 2-3 hours in, and their eyes are like this big, like garbage can covers on it. Is everything okay? They go, it's okay. We've just never seen like this in our life. So in the end, they told me I burned 11,300 calories in 9 hours. Now, to give you an idea, I went 12 hours. The battery died, so it didn't measure the last 3 hours on me. And he was explaining to me, I said, how's that possible? He said, that's 2.5 marathons back to back at a run-walk pace. And he said, Tony, it's not just you running up the building and running around. He said, the minute you got ready, when you were beginning, your calorie intake exploded from the way you use your mind.
Yeah.
Your mind changes it as well. So that's the first. Second thing that they found was that I jumped over 1,000 times in one day in those 9 hours. I did more than that because it was 12 hours. And he explained to me, I'm 282 pounds. So every time you come down, it's 4 times your body weight at impact. So he said, Tony, you have 1,000 pounds at 1,000 times. That's 1,000,000 pounds of pressure. So they went and did my bone density and they showed me the chart and they go, this is humans. This is Olympic athletes. This is something we've never measured on earth called your body. Because 1,000,000 pounds of pressure every day has put a level of demand that has made my bones so effing strong and thick. I've never broken a bone in my life. You know from being an athlete that when you run, if you run with a friend, there's a point if you're running fast enough where you can't speak anymore because you build up lactate. Once lactate gets to 4, you can't speak.
Right.
I was 9 hours into it and my lactate was 12 and I was still speaking. So I tell you that as a background to what I put this body through. What they wrote at the end of the report is 99% of people will be in the hospital or dead at the end of this process. And that was one day of the multiple day program. So I have all these hacks. Some of my favorites, again, you're familiar with some of these as well because you and I have shared these before. But I think that from standpoint of you look at your body and figure out what do you need. One of the biggest breakdowns in your body is inflammation, as we all know. Yep. Inflammation is where everything starts. The breakdown starts. So I'm a very big proponent of cryotherapy. I put my body in, minus 240 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, and in 3 minutes I'm there. When I was a football player, I'd load myself up with ice every 20 minutes. It burned like hell. It took me an hour and a half to get everything working. In 3 minutes, you're done. And now, as you know, you can go to so many locations where they have them. You don't have to own one. You can pop in. I'm fortunate to own them myself, but I do that 3 times a week. And during an event, I do it each day to take that inflammation down because the demands of inflammation is huge. I have a PMF machine. There are many on the market, but I have one that's solid state. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a electronic magnetic frequency that is put into your body by this device. In Germany, they use it to destroy cancer cells because healthy cells have 80 microvolts and they have a thick outer cell. Cancer cells, because they're multiplying so rapidly, have a very thin outer cell and they're only 20 microvolts. And so when this electricity hits it, it literally explodes them. And so it's used for that. In this country, it's used in order to put voltage into the cells. And you and I both know the quality of your life is the quality of the health of your cells. The cells make up the organs, make up the systems, makes up your body. So it literally puts the voltage in. Now, there's a lot of PMF machines out there. Some are really weak, some are really strong, and you'll jolt the hell out of you. But the one I work with is a group out of Atlanta, Georgia, and they're the only ones I know of that makes a solid state, and it's phenomenal. But I take one on the road.
They've been on Bulletproof Radio before. I've got one behind me here as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, they got some
I'm
Pulse
the name of the company. What's the name of the company?
Pulse Centers.
That's right, Pulse Centers. Yeah. They do a fantastic job. And then thirdly, I have a hyperbaric oxygen machine. Full blown glass. I have it in my home to give you an idea. And I do that. I do groups of 40 hours. I turn on TV program and I watch and go for 45 minutes. I've got a protocol that I do that gives me that kind of strength.
I've got the soft chamber back there. I don't know if you can see that on my camera, and my hard chamber's downstairs. So Tony, I love it, man. And I know you have more toys than I do, but I want the audience to hear, man, you kick ass, but it's conscious. Right. So what else do you have going on? Like it's not just an accident. You are a freak of nature, but you're an amplified freak of nature consciously. And that's the mindset that's so valuable. What else are you doing that the audience would just want to know about?
I think, I think you're well aware that I've always, even before I had cryotherapy, I have cold plunges in all my homes. And first thing I do in the morning is I go in 56 degree water. And when I'm at my home in Sun Valley, I go right into the river, which is, usually about 38 degrees. And it's, you cannot believe the difference in your body. It feels horrible to get in. There's never a day where I go, I can't wait to jump in this cold ass freezing water. Never a day. But I don't negotiate with myself. It's not only a health issue, it's also teaching my brain that when I say go, we go. I don't negotiate with myself. So I do that as well. I do a variety of different types of body work. I take, a chiropractor with me on the road to give you an idea. So I look at any tool. I train with a Vasper. I think you have a Vasper as well.
Yeah.
But I also use oxygen deprivation so that, on all the hills, I have no oxygen. So, they did all those tests I told you about. And then 4 months later, I went and did it again after doing my new regimen of workouts. And OsteoStrong's part of that as well to build muscle. And I had 20% greater output with the same, heart demands. So, I'm continually saying, how do I make it stronger? And I'm 58 years old and I'm stronger. I can lift more. I can run faster. I have greater stability in my back and spine, better flexibility than I did when I was 26 and in pain every day of my life. So I'm always looking for the answers, and I do stem cells. I do cord stem cells 3 times a year. Bob Harari's my partner in Cellularity, and we raised $250 million to start that company.
Love Bob.
He is the #1 genius in the world in that area. So, and we're very excited about the breakthroughs that we're bringing in that area because I just got back from the Vatican where we had the Regenerative Health Conference there, and I was the cleanup speaker, so I got to be there for the whole training. And there are things happening right now, again, that you would think would happen 3, 4, 5 years, 30 or 40, 50 years from now, that'll happen in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years that are already in phase 2 and phase 3 trials of the FDA. So there's some exciting stuff coming.
Tony, that Vatican trip you were on with Peter Diamandis, I was scheduled to go, but it conflicted with my daughter's 10th birthday, or
Oh,
It was my
understand.
son's, whatever it was, but I missed it for a birthday, and I missed one of your big events for another kid's birthday. I tell you, man, that sounded like the most epic thing ever, to be able to spend a week working with the top stem cell people and all. Because I know that you're dialed in on that stuff. And for all of the listeners right now, Tony and I both spend large amounts of money on this stuff. I believe it's the most important investment you can make, even if you read Unshakeable. If you're feeling like crap all the time, you're in pain the way you and I both were as young men, you can't put a price on removing that pain. But in my mind, if you take the money that would have gone into your risk bucket and you put it into your biology bucket until you're at least minimum acceptable performance, I think you're doing it wrong. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, but I don't think you have to choose. I think we all have this mindset that says that I can only do so much. It's like what I tell people is whatever you take off the top and automate, you'll forget about and you'll adjust. And if you're an entrepreneur, you'll make more. You'll figure it out. Ken Blanchard was, very influential in my life. And one of the core decisions I made, which was, I remember when I was just coming out with my first book, Unlimited Power, and I was coming out with my first infomercial. And, I'm a new businessman. I'm building my company. And Ken came to me and said two things. First, he said, how the hell do you run your company? He goes, I speak for an hour. You speak for 50 hours in a weekend. He goes, and I said, I'm not doing a good job of it. And he said, you got to get somebody who really can run this thing for you. And then the next thing he said to me is, don't put a dime of the money that's coming from those books into the company. He said, this is what was taught to me. And he said, get all the leads for the company, put a dime in it. Put all that money in an investment account that you don't touch. And he said, because whatever amount of cash you have for the business will take it. And I found that to be absolutely true in a growing business. So you have to mark it out. And when the business had tough times, I had plenty of money. It was a good shape. Similarly, I think putting money aside or having investment aside for things that make you feel healthier or stronger, there is no greater investment, but it shouldn't be either or. You can still make it happen. You need to make these things a must, not a should. When it's a must, it's like people that work out 5 days a week, they don't have more time. It's just that it's a must to work out. For other people, it's a should. And if you make it a must to take care of your body and a must to keep growing financially, you can get in amazing places. Most people, the numbers get so big, they don't get started. But, when I try to get people across, we all know compounded interest. You can rattle off statistics. But usually if you can get a kid to understand this, it changes their life. Like I take kids that are 19 years old and say, look, put aside $300 a month. I know it seems like a lot of what you're earning, but right now you don't have a lot of overhead. Put it aside. And just do that for 8 years, from 19 to 27 years old, put in the stock market and forget about it. The average return for the last, century has been 10%, but the last 20 years, it's been 8%. Let's assume an 8% growth pattern. That person is going to put in $28,000 over 8 years. That's all they're ever going to invest. And they're going to stop at 27. They'll have $1.8 million at retirement. If a buddy of theirs starts at 27 and goes all the way to 60 with $300 a year and gets the same rate of return, he ends up with $400,000 less money, and he has to invest for a lifetime. He invests $140,000. So it doesn't take a lot of money to become financially free or successful. What it takes is a little time and absolute consistency. And I think health is the same thing. You're going to try and suddenly do one big thing to save your health. It's not going to work. What I'm doing is I'm consistently doing the things that will make the greatest difference in the quality of my life. And it's my mission to serve. So I got to take care of this vehicle, because otherwise, if I don't care to take care of the body, nothing else works.
What do you say to one of your $100 million plus kind of personal clients who walks in the door 40 pounds overweight and with a limp? Like, what's the first thing you say to them?
Well, if they're coming to me, it depends on, I don't say, I listen. I find out why they're here, because talking will be what I think should be done. I need to hear what they want. Right. And so I spend most of my time asking questions. Somebody actually went in a session with me recently, and they counted, this person stood up to ask me a question, and I asked 167 questions before I gave my first answer.
Wow.
167.
That's beautiful.
But I knew so much about the person, how they think, what they feel before I intervene. Then when I can intervene, it doesn't take long to intervene, because I know how their brain is set up. I know what they want. I know what they fear. I always say life is the dance between what you desire most and what you fear most. That's where people live. So if I can expand your desire and reduce your fears, we get to enrich in your life massively, expand the depth and the breadth of your life. And so pretty much that's what I'm looking for when I'm doing intervene. But I don't look at anybody that's overweight who's coming in just for money and let them just know, about money. I make sure if they're asking for permission or they're asking for my coaching, I always tell them, look, if you don't take care of this, a person who's got health has a million goals, a million. A person who's ill has one effing goal, right? Get well. I don't care how much money they have. So you don't want to be richest man in the graveyard is not your goal, right? You got to take care of
Yeah.
yourself.
I always feel a little sad. I've had the opportunity, like you, to just rooms full of very successful people, and the number of wealthy people 10 years ago who would say, "I've done my blood work." It was no one in the room. As I have an annual checkup once a year, and they hit my knee with a hammer, and I must be good. And now you go in, and I would say 90% of the room of successful people, they're people who are actively getting data and they're trying to manage their health like their portfolio. And I'm really inspired by that, because when we get the people who are captains of industry, guys like you who understand the things that you understand, we will make investments. We'll do things for our employees that have that same kind of an effect. And I think what we're going to see is a big change in feeding the world, but not just feeding the world, it's feeding the world the right things.
I agree. And I think you're going to see such a difference in the quality of people's lives as that occurs.
Yeah.
There's also some tools coming out. Are you familiar with SomniMed in San Diego?
No.
So while I was in the Vatican, you got to know about this because you'll spread this and your listeners will as well. I watched miracle after miracle. People get up there that were stage 4 cancer, and the old approach to cancer was kill every cell. Yeah. You hope to kill more, bad cells than good cells. But as you know, radiation and the approach of chemotherapy is a pretty brutal approach. I think we're going to look back on this stage. It'll look like bloodletting at one point. Is the best that we knew. So nobody's doing anything wrong. It's just the best that we knew. But so you see these breakthroughs in like CAR T cell, breakthroughs where people are sent home to die and they're totally healthy now. You see these kids with like floppy spines where, these kids can't lift their neck or their head as babies, and they usually die within 6 months of suffocation. And then a 6-year-old walks out and was given stem cells and is totally healthy, right?
Yeah.
And there's not a dry eye on the place. But out of all the cool stuff that I saw that was there and people I got to meet, the one that blew me away the most were the people that understood the Wnt pathway. Are you familiar with the WNT pathway?
Absolutely. I take some herbs for it.
Great. So the Wnt pathway, for your listeners, it's the holy grail to the body. So I'll give you an example. Bob Harari, my partner, is a neurosurgeon, and he's the top stem cell expert in the world. If you read the studies that stem cells came out of, it came from him almost 30 years ago, where he took old rats and gave them young rats blood, and they grew new muscle, new hair. He took the old rats' blood, put in the young rats, and they got old, basically. So in the beginning, it sounded kind of creepy, like our rich people are going to get young people and feed off their blood.
Right.
But what it led to was understanding what stem cells are and what they do. So Bob was explaining to me, stem cells are not equal, as you well know. You can go get adipose, which is available in the U.S., which is skin, and they'll take them out of you, but your stem cells drop off the earth when you're about 30, and they keep going down further and further. So you're getting old stem cells. If you do bone marrow, it's pretty damn invasive, to say the least.
Oh yeah, I've done it twice.
And yeah, really, really painful. And then the best that's available right now, you can only get outside the country, which is, you can go get cord stem cells. They're 10 days old. So instead of, I'm 58, instead of 58-year-old stem cells, they're 10 days old. They're 100 times more powerful. And they use machine learning to find the very best. Bob was saying, but here's what's amazing. The placenta, which is the basis that he's building our new company on, is the most powerful of all, both stem cells and growth hormones. So there's never been a time in history when a mother who is cancerous has transferred her cancer to the baby, because that's how powerful the placenta is.
Right.
Literally, not even cancer can penetrate it, right? And when Bob sees as a client a baby, a fetus that has got spinal bifida, where the spine is outside the skin, if it's born that way, it'll die or it'll be paralyzed for life. So Bob will go in the mother's womb while she's pregnant, open the womb, take out the baby, the fetus, sew up its back, put it back in there, sew back up the placenta. 8 weeks later, the baby's born, and there's no evidence whatsoever there was ever a surgery. There's no scar. There's no nothing. And if a baby's born in the first 2 to 10 days, and it depends on the baby, and it chops off a finger or two, they grow back like a salamander, because you still have those fetal stem cells. Now, all this is a background to tell you that once those are gone, everything you call you is stem cells grown by a signaling pathway, which is the WNT or the Wnt signaling pathway. It tells your brain and your nervous system, make this many brain stem cells, make this many heart stem cells, when to start building them, when to stop building them. It is the system that the pharmaceutical industry has spent a quarter of a century trying to find the breakthroughs to. A pharmaceutical company partnered with this brilliant group of researchers, and then they bought a very large company and decided, oh, hell with it, we're not going to continue down this line. And 9 months after they stopped being partners, this group figured out the stem cell component. And so here's what it does. They have an injection right now. These things are in phase 2. So people know phase 1 is to make sure something is safe in the FDA. Phase 2 is efficacy. You're going to have phase 2, 1, A and B. And then phase 3 is efficacy at scale. So most things I'm going to tell you are either in phase 2 or in phase 3 trials, which means they're 2.5 or 3 years away roughly. So they have an injection right now that they can give you. It just blows my mind even to mention this, Dave. And if you have osteoarthritis, it will grow back your tendons in 12 weeks. One time, one injection, naturally your own stem cells, because they know how to signal that signaling element. And the tendons you get are young tendons. They're not 40 or 50-year-old tendons. So these guys all own the company. They all play football and everything else now. They all have had injections in the knees. And they're like, it's like Cocoon, like all these old people getting young again. It's so wild. They have an injection that I can't wait to get access to.
Oh, yeah.
That they can put in your spine and it regrows your discs. Imagine all the demands I've made in that area. They have 8 cancers that they have a track record on that's unbelievable, including breast cancer, testicular cancer, but most importantly, not prostate. What's the one for your sugar, for your bloodstream?
Pancreas.
Pancreatic cancer, which is, as you know, the most virulent cancer of all.
Steve Jobs cancer, yeah.
You basically die is the bottom way that people look at it. 97.2% effectiveness with one tablet that the person takes, and it's gone. I met a woman. Wow. They showed me a picture afterwards. I could not believe it. She looked like a woman out of Auschwitz, literally bones. And I met her. She looked gorgeous. And 3 months after they started this process, they showed the pictures of her become normalized. And now she not only has no cancer, but she's dating. It's just wild. They have one that grows, what do you call it, in your skin, grows
collagen.
Collagen, thank you. One that grows hair. And then they've got 2 that are preclinical, so they're only being done in rats. But every animal they tested has a Wnt pathway. And when you normally test something in animals, you hope it'll happen with humans. Everything they've tested with animals has worked with humans so far. But they're doing things with the spine and the brain in that area that they have not published yet, so I can't talk about it. But what I can tell you is very exciting for dementia, very exciting for those that are paralyzed. When I say exciting, like beyond your imagination. So everything I told you up until the preclinical is already happening as we speak and is in phase 2 and phase 3 trials. This company is one of the most highly valued private companies in the world. They have a $13 billion valuation. They haven't sold one product yet. And they didn't publish anything until that conference. So a lot of doctors like, oh, this is BS. And then they start showing the data and it blew them away. And they're like, why didn't you publish this before? And they said, because we wanted a 10-year jump on everybody because they're businessmen as well. So they're publishing this year, I think it's 38 articles in various medical journals showing how all this works. It's very exciting. And it's like, if you just take care of yourself in the next few years, there's going to be some tools out there that are beyond your imagination.
This is why I've been telling people I realistically plan to live to at least 180 years old, because I know this stuff is in the pipeline and I know we can do 120 with what we've got now. I don't think I'm being conservative, but it makes people think I'm nuts. Tony, what's your goal?
I think the most important thing is the quality of your life, right? That's what I look at.
Okay.
How long we live, we don't really control, but how we live, and to be able to replace parts and grow them fresh is just a miraculous thought. And it's not a thought anymore; it's a reality.
Do you have a length of time you think you're going to live that's realistic, assuming nothing unforeseen happens?
Yeah, I think in terms of 100 years is a good long natural life. I think 120 might be an extended life that would be very possible with the tools that are coming. But I'm more obsessed with being fully alive while I'm here.
Oh yeah,
and having full functioning while I'm here and peak performance when I'm here. Because I think that's the only real is today. So yeah, I want to protect tomorrow, but I'm not vested in a certain age. Right. I don't want to be 200 years old or something like that. But if technology offers me it, I think great. But I think there's an old Ray Kurzweil told me an old story years ago. It's a really good example. And Ray's one of the greatest inventors of all time, and he was telling me about some of these tools that he had just built. I remember he told me he was going to build this tool the size of a pack of cigarettes. And, in those days we didn't have a cell phone. And he said it's going to be able to read signs and read, the menu so a blind person can truly navigate. And he literally told me he'd build it in 12 years. He didn't know how. He just knew the technology would make it possible by then. And he did it 6 months earlier than he said. So he's just a genius guy. But the reason I bring it up is when you talk about if we really could live forever, would everybody?
Probably not.
And I don't think so. And, I remember when we were at the conference, at the Vatican, and we hung out with the Pope and we had some really cool conversations with a lot of brilliant minds. But I remember Peter, the amount of raising it, saying, how many you want to live to be 120, 130, 140? Very few people raised their hand. And so I was saying to Peter, it's like this old story that he told me. There was an old Twilight Zone that Ray Dalio was telling me. I didn't see it, but he told me the story. Not Ray Dalio, Ray Kurzweil. And he said to me, he said, in this particular one, this guy is a gambler and he dies. And as a gambler, where's heaven? It's Las Vegas. And if you're really a great gambler, then you would, of course, get the presidential suite at the Wynn. And so he says, the guy wakes up in this thing and he's at the top of the most expensive hotel. And he's like, wow, I'm in heaven. Heaven is Vegas. And he opens the, dresser drawers and he sees brand new suits and he puts one on and he opens the drawers and there's all this jewelry and cash and credit cards. He goes downstairs and every woman notices him. And he goes and he plays blackjack. 21 you win, 21 you win, 10 times in a row he wins. He goes over, and rolls the dice and crap. 7 you win, 7 you win. And this goes on all day, all night. He is euphoric. He goes home not alone, fully happy with the women that he's with. Wakes up the next morning, does the same thing again. This goes on for about 2 weeks. And one day he's at the table and they go, blackjack, you win. He goes, I always effing win. So I'm tired of this. He said, I want to talk to the main angel. Something's wrong here. And the main angel comes and he's dressed like, suit and tie and a bow tie and tuxedo rather. And he comes up and he says, can I help you, sir? And he goes, there's a mistake here. I was not a good person. I did not belong in heaven. And the man looks at him and says, who said you're in heaven? If we got everything we wanted every moment, would we really value it? If we had life eternally, would we really value it? So I don't think we're going to have eternal life just yet, but I think we're going to have a chance to extend the quality of our lives. And that is something I'm obsessed about because energy is life. And if we can have more healthy energy, we have more love to share, more joy to share, more things we can create, more things we can give. Life is a miraculous place.
You live that, Tony. And I've got one more question for you to wrap up the interview. Someone comes to you tomorrow. They said, Tony, based on everything you know, everything you've done, I want to perform better at everything I do as a human being. What are your 3 most important pieces of advice? Only 3.
Number 1 is why. Because while they're feeling this right now, they're not going to feel it when they bump into all the things that are going to get in the way to achieve what they want. Okay. You got to have strong enough reasons, and they usually got to be reasons larger than yourself. Yeah. Most of us will do more for others we love than we'll ever do for ourselves. So there has to be a mission to this. Otherwise, what you just told me is bullshit. It's not going to happen.
Yep.
I think 2 is you need to find a role model. Now, they may not be doing what you're doing, but they may have done more than what you want to do. They may have done something similar, but you need something that shows you a pathway that can save you time. Because if you're going to learn just by trial and error, it could be a long time. I'm a big believer in compressing decades into days. So I would access for whatever it is I wanted to master is what I do, the very best in the world. And I'd find a way to add value to them so they'd open up to me. But even if I couldn't do that, in the world we live in today with blogs and posts and social media, you can pretty much model anybody's psychology who's any kind of thought leader today because there's so much to read or learn from them. And I say the third thing is, if you've got this true mission and you really have a good outline or a plan, you've got to stay fully awake and alive to, are you adding value enough in this current moment, in this environment, to whatever you're doing? If you're constantly finding a way to add value, it means you're going to be innovating. If you're innovating, you're going to be doing more for others than anybody else. If you're doing more for others than anybody else, you're not going to have to worry about prospering. So I'd say get strong enough reasons, get a role model, and get your ass to work. That's the bottom line.
I love it. What powerful advice. Tony, it's always a pleasure to get to spend time with you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with Bulletproof Radio listeners and with the world. You're doing good work. And for people listening, pick up a copy of Unshakeable, help feed a bunch of families, and learn something really useful about how to get wealthy, because having enough money to take care of your biology and those around you is truly a gift. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, brother. Great to see you again. Take care.